Hello, I'm Jeremy, and today I'm going to be taking a look at a roll and write game by the name of Dizzle. This is published by Schmidt-Spiel. It's a German edition I have. I was able to print English rules of this for this off of Board Game Geek. The game is designed by Ralf Linde, and it is, like I said, published by Schmidt-Spiel. It's a 2019 release. The game plays between 1 and 4 players. The box is about 20 minutes. I found that with 4 players, that it can take maybe a little bit longer, maybe more like 25 to 30 minutes. Although if you're just playing with 1 or 2 players, that 20-minute estimate is realistic. The game is rated for ages 8 and up, which I think is about right. You may be able to go a little bit younger than that. And it is essentially a roll and write game where players are going to be giving a score sheet that essentially has a number of spaces that have required dice pips to be placed on them. So you'll roll dice, you'll draft dice, you'll create a little path along this grid, trying to get to scoring positions or complete rows and columns to score points. I'll take a few minutes to show you how the game plays, and then I'll come back and let you know what I think about it. Dizzle comes with this score pad, which is not only two-sided, but has 2 variants on each side of the page, and there's essentially 4 levels. So there's a level 1, a level 2, a level, and then layer in the score pad, a level 3 and 4. So there's 4 different play fields that you could use. They get progressively harder. I've actually laminated a copy of those, so I'll use that today. It also comes with some of these small markers that players could use to play the game. Plays up to 4, as well as these small dice. There's a number of them. I think there's something like 12 in the box. Based on the number of players, you're going to play over a number of different rounds, and you're going to use a different number of dice. I'm going to demonstrate the solo game today, so I'll just be using essentially 8 dice each round, as well as 2 to simulate other players drafting from the dice pool. The rules are pretty much the same besides that simulation of drafting dice out of the pool for the solo game and other player counts. So I think that this will serve to show you how the game works, regardless of the number of players. So you can see here the score sheet is basically a number of spaces that have die pip counts on them, and then there's these 3 X spaces here. And you're going to be placing dice after they're rolled each turn. Essentially, like if I had a 2, I could put it on this 2 spot, and then as I draft more dice during the round, I could build off of that die. At the end of the round, you'll fill in all of those dice that you have placed on there with X's, and then you could start on the next round from any X that's been filled out, whether it's one that's been just recently drawn in or one of those starter X's. And what you're trying to do during the course of the game is a couple things. You're trying to essentially score points according to this matrix over here. So you could get points, you could see here, for completing rows or columns. So if you fill in all of those spaces with X's, you'll get points. You'll also get points if you X out these gems. They're worth, you can see, 3 points or 2 points depending on the color of the gem. And then there are things like these puzzle pieces here. If you get both of those, you'll get 10-point bonus. So there's the green puzzle pieces and the blue puzzle pieces. And then there are some other things like these keys. The key here, if you get this here, you could pass through that lock. Otherwise, you have to go around. And then these bombs, these are one thing that are slightly different in a solo game. In a solo game, they're just worth 2 points each, but in a multiplayer game, the first person to get it will get to put an X there as normal. Other players would have to scribble it out, and it would be a -2 penalty for other players. So the player who actually does it in a multiplayer game would not get any points, but the other players would lose points. And you can see, like, this is level 1, it's a little simpler, and then the level 3 and level 4 have just a few other things on them. So, like, for example, here, if you cross out one of these rockets, you could then cross out a planet at the end of your turn. So, like, once you X this out, you basically immediately put an X here or here, which would then let you build in this section or this section. There's this little poop, I guess, that gives you negative points. If you cross out at the end of the turn, it'll be -3 points. There's also on this board like a bonus if you get all 4 of these crossed out, that's +10. This side just has some different colored gems, generally the same sorts of things. It does have these flags. The way these flags work, again, in a multiplayer game, this is going to be different. First person to get would get 10 points, second person to get would be 6 points, and so on. So these are pretty simple things on the score pads, regardless of the level that you're playing. So even at the highest level, it's not a very complex game. So let me just adjust the camera here so I could show you my scoreboard, and I'll show you how a few rounds of it will play. So, like I said, in the solo game, you'll roll 8 dice, so I'll just roll those. And you have to pick one of those dice to start building off of one of these X's. So you have to build adjacent. Diagonal adjacencies do not count. So what you'll want to do is you'll want to generally consider when you're placing a die what's going to be next to it. So if I took, for example, this 4 and I put it here, I would then need to put in a 3, or a 5 as my next die. And you can see there are some of those there. But maybe a better move might to be take one of these 6s here, which has a 5 next to it, because there's 2 5s in the pool. So then, in a normal multiplayer game, each other player would take a die out of the pool. And then when it came back to me, I would be able to take another one. The way it works in a solo game instead is you roll these 2 dice. I got a 1 and a 5. And then you would remove 1 5 and 1 1 if possible. So I would take this 5 and it would just go out of the pool. If there wasn't a 1 here, so nothing gets removed on that. If I rolled 2 5s and there were 2 5s, they would both get removed. So it's really a simple solo variant. Then now that that's happened, I get to take essentially one of these dice and add it. So I have a 5 here, which could go next to the 6 on this space with 5 pips. Then I have to roll these again, and they actually, unfortunately, remove both of these 6s. Now I have 4 4 on this side. I have a 2 up here as well. I'm not sure if that could be seen on the camera, but I'll just take the 4. We'll take a 4, try to build over to this puzzle piece maybe. Roll here, and unfortunately one of these 2s comes out. Then I'm left with this 4. I could take that and put that here. So now that there's no dice left, that would be the end of the round. I remove those dice that I had still on my board, and I get to put in an X on each of those spaces. So that would be the first round. Now, on the next round, I'm going to re-roll 8 dice again, just like normal. And I could build a starting space anywhere adjacent to any of these X's that I have. So you can see here, I have uncannily bad luck. I've rolled no 4s, no 6s. So that's both good and bad. It limits my placement possibilities, but it limits the chance of these dice taking dice out of the pool, I suppose. So I wanted to build here, but you can see that requires a 6. But let me just do that for the sake of demonstration. So if I put the 5 here, then I'm going to roll these dice, and I'm going to remove some dice. So I have 6 3, so there's no 6, but the 3 gets taken out. Now I'm in a position where the only space that's adjacent to me is a 6. There's no 6 here. I could do one of 2 things. The first thing I could do is just stop taking dice for the rest of the round. Then I would just be able to fill that in. If it was a multiplayer game, other players would be able to continue drafting dice until they stopped or ran out of dice. And then I would just get to fill this in. The other option that I could do is re-roll all of these dice. And you can only re-roll if you have literally no placement possible. So for right now I have none, so I could re-roll. Once I re-roll, then I did get a 6, so I could place that and my turns would continue normally. If no 6 came up, I would instead, as a penalty, I would have to basically put my die back into the pool. Any die that I've already have placed on my board. So there's a risk involved in that. But since I got the 6, I got lucky and I could continue. So now we have a 2 and a 4. So both of those come out, unfortunately. And I have a 1, 3, and 3. So in this case, I may not want to risk going further, but I get to roll 3 dice. I do need specifically a 2. So let's do it just for the sake of it. I got a 2. And then roll dice. We got a 1 and a 4, so the 4 goes away. And then I get the 6, which gets me onto that key. And now there are no more dice left in the pool, and that would be round 2. So I get to fill in these 4 spots. So I got that bomb, that's 2 points. I got the key, which lets me open in this space over here, and I got the first of those 2 blue puzzle pieces, which would be worth 10 points if I got them both. So this is basically how the game's going to work. And each round you'll be, branching out, making progress, and, then at the end of the round you'll score based on what you got. So if I was going to score right now, I get 2 points for this bomb. Only getting one of these puzzle pieces isn't worth anything, and I would get 3 points for that gem. I didn't complete any rows or columns, but had I done that, I would get points as well. The only other real rule is, let's say, I've built here, and then later I built here. Right, and then with my first placement, I go and I put in this 5. If you do that, since you have no possible space to place a die next to you, for your next space, you could go essentially adjacent to any X. So after I filled in, or after I put a 5 in right here, rather, then if I was going to draft another die, I could draft any die that's along any of these other X's. So it's it just is actually something you try to do, so you give yourself more options, especially in a multiplayer game where other people will be drafting dice, and they might take the die that you need, and that's something that will come up over the course of the game as you're trying to build along these little narrow paths. So that is pretty much how you play Dizzle. Like I said, there are 4 variants. They're all generally played the same, though. Okay, so that is Dizzle, and this is, I think, a game that comes into a space that's very crowded, which is the roll and write space. There's a lot of roll and write games being released these days. This is one that I think stands out on its own in several respects. First of all, although it is dice-based, it's not by any means a Yahtzee variant. It's very much a spatial game where you're trying to build paths, which most roll and write games that use dice tend to fall into, set collection or some variation of Yahtzee. So that's a refreshing change of pace. I think that it's excellent that it has several variants in the box, so each player is going to use the same score sheet when you play, but there are 4 variant score sheets, so that's nice to have that variety built in from the get-go. And then I think just in general, it's very approachable, very obvious what you're trying to do during the game, which is a strength. I will say that I like the game. I don't really love the game. I think that it's better at the lower player counts, even though it only plays up to 4. I find that the 4-player game is pretty chaotic in that every time you draft a die, 3 other players are going to draft a die before it comes back to you. And although the game does compensate somewhat by putting more dice into the pool, it seems, at least in my plays, that there's this uncanny ability to roll all of one number, which really limits options as the game goes. You always have the option to re-roll again, but that's a risky choice. So it's a game that I think works better either as a solo game or maybe as a 2-player game than it does as a 3 or 4-player game. It also tends to play closer to that 20-minute mark at those player counts, I find, because essentially, although it is a route planning game, if you are planning on going a certain path on your board, if other players draft your dice, all of a sudden you have to stop and reconsider your entire strategy for the turn. So I wouldn't say it induces AP, that would be an overstatement, but essentially because of the chaotic nature of that dice drafting that happens, you often have your plans stashed and have to come up with a new plan. So that's just, and again, if somebody re-rolls, that changes everybody's plan. So it's just the nature of the beast that with 4 people thinking about how to plan their turn several times during a given turn, it's a relatively long process. Again, I'm talking about 25 minutes, but I think 25 minutes does push the amount of time that I want a game like this to take, especially one that's relatively simple like this. So it takes longer. It's relatively simple for what it is. Although it is unique, that to me is not the best combination. There are other roll and writes that I think give you more strategic decisions as opposed to more luck-based decisions, which is what this is, in a shorter amount of time. So I might offer other games in the genre. That's not in any way to really say that this is a bad game. I think it's novel, and I think it's fun, and I've enjoyed my plays of it, but I don't think, partially because of the vast number of roll and writes that are coming out right now, that it's a top game in the genre. But if you after looking at the video, you think it appeals to you, I think that it's a reasonable choice to get. The game is not expensive by any means, and again, if you just play it, a few times or pull it out every once and again, you'll get your money's worth. So I wouldn't say I don't recommend it, but again, there are a lot of games coming out in this space right now. So those are my thoughts on Dizzle, and thank you for watching.